Recovery is definitely, for sure, not going to be a smooth process. If you love someone or care about someone who's struggling with addiction, I know you're exhausted and you're frustrated, and a lot of your efforts just go into finally getting them help. And a lot of times you might be thinking, okay, finally they're getting help, things are going to get better. That's true, things are going to get better, but they're not going to get better right away, and they're not going to get better in some sort of like straight line to wellness. It doesn't happen like point A to point B in a straight line. Recovery really happens more like, you make a few steps forward and a couple steps back, a few steps forward and a couple steps back, but eventually you get there. If you have your expectations in line, it's going to be so much easier for you and for them because you're going to be less frustrated. A lot of these videos are really about helping you understand what recovery looks like, what to expect, the right information and the right advice to make it go as smooth as possible, but realizing it's going to be move forward, move back, move forward, move back, and that doesn't mean that it's not working. In the counseling world, there's this thing that you have to study called stages of change, and they have these fancy names, and I'm going to break those down for you because I think it really sort of highlights how a person really goes from problem to solution. So the first stage of change is called pre-contemplation. And that's just a fancy way of saying denial. It means a person doesn't think they have a problem at all. And this is probably the most frustrating stage for family members. You can hear people say the craziest things and be like, wow, did you really just say that? Like, do you really believe that? Like, it just seems so obvious. But denial is super powerful. Some other videos that I've made that you can watch that talk about how denial actually works. Make sure you check those out. So stage number 1, I don't have a problem. Stage number 2 is called contemplation. And that means maybe I have a problem. It's like I'm thinking about it stage is what I call it. And so usually it's like, well, okay, I have a problem and maybe I'm drinking too much or using too much or it's getting out of hand sometimes or whatever the problem is, but it's not that bad. So it's like the beginning stages of starting to really consider whether or not this is an issue. That stage leads into bargaining, which I've made lots of videos about, and it talks about all the trial and error that the person goes through when they're trying to get something under control. I know it's frustrating when you see this happen. It doesn't mean that they're not trying. It means that they're trying all the things that they know. And yes, most of those things are not going to work because usually they're trying to like deal with the problem but not totally do the one thing they really don't want to do, which maybe is like not get rid of the substance totally or not lose this one person that's really like the problem or whatever it is. So you're going to see that bargaining. When you see that, just be happy because it means, hey, we're a step closer to getting to where we need to be. And then there's preparation. And preparation and contemplation kind of go hand in hand. It's basically for just fancy for like researching things and looking into options and making phone calls and talking to people. So I might not have put it down totally, but taken some steps to put some things in place that might actually be effective and help me get there. Maybe I try out some meetings. Maybe I talk to a friend of mine I know who got sober, something like that. That's preparation. Maybe I call some counseling centers or treatment centers. Those are all preparation. And then action. So when people move into action, it means they sort of, in recovery language, it's basically like they get willing. They get willing to do whatever it takes. They don't just call the treatment center, they go. They don't just make counseling appointments, they go. They go to meetings, they talk to their sponsor. Whatever it is that's their plan, they're actively working it consistently. And it may not mean that it's perfect and that doesn't mean that there's not going to be any problems, but it means they're really working on it. And then lastly, the last stage is called maintenance, which means exactly what it sounds like. It means, okay, I've worked really hard, I've made these changes, and now I have to figure out how to maintain it. And the best way to think of it is like an exercise program. You can lose a lot of weight, but if you don't figure out how to maintain it, it's just going to come back. So don't think, even after action, even after they're sober for a year, don't think that it's over. There's still a lot of maintenance to be done. Campbell says, and I'm sure she heard it somewhere else, one of her boys or somebody, who says, recovery is like standing on a down moving escalator. If you're not moving forward, if you're not actively taking steps forward, you're going backwards. So you can't just rest on your haunches and think your recovery is going to be okay. You've got to do something that keeps recovery in the forefront. No, that doesn't mean you have to go to a meeting every day for the rest of your life, but you've got to have some way to make sure that recovery is a central place in your life. Otherwise, what happens, we all have this sort of natural tendency to forget painful things. It's a good thing. It's a natural defense mechanism we have. Otherwise, people would never have more than one baby. You forget how awful it was, and the difficulties and the staying up all night and all that stuff. We forget those things. It's just not so helpful when it comes to recovery, because so the longer you get away from it, you start to forget how terrible this thing was and all those things that really motivated you. Eventually, you just remember the good times and you forget why. That's why you have to have an active way. I call it, maintenance for me is, how do I keep the truth in front of me? How do I keep growing spiritually? How do I take care of those underlying factors and make sure I keep my mental health in check so that I don't need to use a substance to medicate? All of those things are involved in maintenance. Sometimes you're in a maintenance stage and you relapse and you go right back into the action stage. I call that a lapse. Sometimes you're in the maintenance stage and you relapse and you go all the way back in denial. And sometimes when people do that, it's so frustrating. Honestly, that's like more frustrating than seeing someone be in denial and get sober to begin with. It's like seeing a person that's got it, like they really have, they understand recovery and addiction, go all the way back to denial. That will make you want to pull your hair out. It is completely maddening because you're like, oh, I just saw you last week. You just told me this. Like, how all of a sudden you're taking that back? And so how you handle that's really, really important. It's kind of a delicate issue. And we have some other videos to tell you exactly what to do in that situation. It is frustrating, but don't let it pull you back on the roller coaster.